What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors refuses to play along with a late-night host's agenda? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that ended with Denzel Washington being escorted off Jimmy Kimmel's set. A moment that exposed the ugly side of celebrity interviews and left everyone in the studio speechless. This isn't just another Hollywood drama. This is about respect, integrity, and what happens when someone finally says enough is enough. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story will change how you see late-night television. Forever, the atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio felt different that Tuesday evening. The usual pre-show energy was there. The audience was buzzing with excitement, but something felt off backstage. Denzel Washington had arrived for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview for his latest film. But the veteran actor seemed unusually tense as he sat in the green room reviewing his talking points with his publicist, Jimmy Kimmel. Meanwhile, was huddled with his producers, going over what they called the real interview agenda. The plan was simple: push Denzel on some controversial topics that had been swirling around Hollywood. Get him to react, create some viral moments that would dominate social media for days. It was the kind of ambush journalism that had become Kimmel's trademark, disguised as comedy and casual conversation. When the cameras started rolling, everything seemed normal at first. Kimmel delivered his usual monologue, made his predictable jokes, and introduced Denzel with the kind of glowing praise that made the audience applaud enthusiastically. Denzel walked out with his characteristic calm confidence, that slight smile that had charmed audiences for decades, and settled into the guest chair. The first few minutes went exactly as expected. They talked about the new movie. Denzel shared a funny story from the set, and Kimmel played the part of the interested host perfectly. But anyone paying close attention could see the shift happening. Kimmel's questions started getting more personal, more pointed, and his tone began to change from friendly to probing. Then came the moment everything started to unravel. Kimmel leaned forward with that smirk he gets when he thinks he's about to land a big moment and said, "So Denzel, there's been a lot of talk lately about older actors and whether they're still relevant in today's Hollywood. Some people are saying, then maybe it's time for your generation to step aside and make room for fresh faces. What's your response to that?" Denzel's expression didn't change immediately, but those who knew him could see something flicker in his eyes. He paused for just a moment, then responded with measured words. "Jimmy, I'm not sure where you're getting that from, but I'd be curious to know who exactly is saying that and why you think that's an appropriate question to ask someone who's been in this business for over 40 years. Kimmel, instead of backing down or acknowledging the awkwardness of his question, doubled down with a laugh that felt forced. "Oh, come on, Denzel. You know how Hollywood works. Everyone's expendable eventually, right? I'm just wondering if you've thought about your exit strategy." The studio audience, which had been laughing and applauding moments before, fell into an uncomfortable silence. Even the band members exchanged glances, sensing that something was going very wrong very quickly. Denzel shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening slightly, but his voice remained controlled when he replied, "I think there might be some confusion here about what kind of interview this is supposed to be." But Kimmel wasn't done. He had clearly prepared for this moment and wasn't going to let it go. "Look, I'm just asking the questions that everyone's thinking. You've had a great run, but don't you think it might be time to consider stepping back? I mean, how many more movies about the same character types can you really make?" That's when Denzel's composure began to crack, not in an explosive way, but in the way of a man who had reached his limit with someone's disrespect. "Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about my work and to connect with people who appreciate that work. I didn't come here to be insulted by someone who seems to think ambushing guests is the same thing as entertainment." The tension in the studio was now palpable, but Jimmy Kimmel seemed oblivious to the line he had crossed, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Instead of recognizing that he had pushed too far, he appeared to feed off the uncomfortable energy. Mistaking Denzel's controlled anger for weakness, this was the moment that would define everything that followed. When a seasoned professional tried to maintain his dignity while facing down a host who had abandoned all pretense of respect, Kimmel leaned back in his chair with that same smirk. Clearly thinking he had Denzel on the defensive. "Oh, come on, Denzel. Don't be so sensitive. This is just good television. The audience loves it when things get a little heated, right, folks?" He gestured to the crowd, trying to get them to applaud, but the response was scattered and uncertain. Most people in the audience could sense that something had gone seriously wrong, that this wasn't the playful banter they had come to expect from late-night interviews. Denzel looked directly at Kimmel. His voice still controlled, but with an edge that anyone with sense would have recognized as a final warning. "Jimmy, I've been doing interviews for longer than you've been on television. I know the difference between good television and cheap. That's what you're doing right now isn't entertainment, it's disrespect. And I'm not going to sit here and let you continue." But Kimmel, either too arrogant or too committed to his planned ambush to back down, pressed forward. "Disrespect. I'm just asking honest questions that your fans want answers to. Maybe the real problem is that you can't handle honest questions anymore. Maybe that's the real sign that it's time to step back." The audience gasped audibly at this comment. Even Kimmel's own bandleader looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact with anyone. The cameramen continued filming, but you could see some of them exchanging worried glances. This had gone far beyond normal late-night television territory, and everyone in the room knew it, except apparently Jimmy Kimmel himself. Denzel sat forward in his chair, his hands clasped together, and spoke with the kind of quiet intensity that made every word carry weight. "Let me explain something to you, Jimmy. I've been in this business since before you knew what a camera was. I've worked with legends. I've earned my place, and I've never had to tear other people down to build myself up. What you're doing right now, this isn't brave, it isn't funny, and it isn't good television. It's just sad." Instead of taking this as an opportunity to diffuse the situation, Kimmel made what would prove to be his biggest mistake of the night. He actually laughed, a condescending sound that echoed through the now silent studio. "Wow, someone's really in their feelings tonight. Look, Denzel, I get that this might be hard for you to hear, but sometimes the truth hurts. Maybe instead of getting all worked up, you should consider that I might have a point." That's when something shifted in Denzel's demeanor. Up until this moment, he had been trying to handle the situation professionally, giving Kimmel multiple chances to course correct and salvage what was left of the interview. But Kimmel's continued disrespect and his dismissive attitude had finally pushed the legendary actor past his breaking point. Denzel stood up slowly, not in a threatening way, but with the kind of deliberate movement that commanded attention. "You know what, Jimmy? I think we're done here. I came on your show as a guest with respect for your platform and your audience, but you've made it clear that respect isn't something you value." Kimmel, apparently still not grasping the severity of the situation, actually gestured for Denzel to sit back down. "Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. Sit down. Let's talk this through. You're being way too sensitive about this whole thing." The word sensitive hit Denzel like a slap, and for the first time since the interview began, his carefully maintained composure cracked completely. "Sensitive? You think I'm being sensitive? Let me tell you what sensitive is, Jimmy. Sensitive is a host who has to tear down his guests to make himself feel important. Sensitive is someone who mistakes cruelty for comedy. Sensitive is a man who can't recognize when he's crossed every line of basic human decency." The studio was now completely silent except for Denzel's voice, which carried a power and authority that made everyone present understand they were witnessing something unprecedented. Even the producers in the control room had stopped their usual chatter and were watching the monitors in stunned silence. Kimmel, perhaps finally beginning to realize that he had miscalculated badly, tried to laugh it off one more time. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we start over? Talk about your movie like we planned." But Denzel was already removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. "No, Jimmy, we're not starting over. You don't get to spend 10 minutes disrespecting me and then pretend it was all a misunderstanding. You made your choices tonight, and now you get to live with the consequences." As Denzel began to walk toward the edge of the stage, Kimmel made his final, fatal error. Instead of letting him leave with whatever dignity remained in the situation, he called out loud, "Enough for everyone to hear. Really? You're just going to walk out? What happened to the Denzel Washington who could handle tough questions? I guess those days are over." Denzel stopped walking. He turned around slowly, and everyone in that studio knew that Jimmy Kimmel had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The legendary actor walked back toward the desk, not to sit down, but to address Kimmel directly, face to face. with the kind of presence that reminded everyone why he had commanded respect in Hollywood. For decades, when Denzel Washington turned around and walked back toward Jimmy Kimmel's desk, the atmosphere in the studio transformed completely. This wasn't the controlled, professional demeanor that audiences had come to expect from the seasoned actor. This was a man who had been pushed beyond his limit by someone who had mistaked his patience for weakness. Every person in that studio, from the audience members to the crew, understood they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. Denzel approached the desk with measured steps, his eyes never leaving Kimmel's face. The host, who had been so confident in his ability to provoke and control the situation, suddenly looked much smaller in his chair. For the first time since the interview began, Jimmy Kimmel seemed to realize that he might have miscalculated just how far he could push one of Hollywood's most respected figures. When Denzel reached the desk, he didn't sit down. Instead, he placed both hands on the surface and leaned forward, speaking in a voice that was quiet but carried to every corner of the studio. "You want to know what happened to the Denzel Washington who could handle tough questions, Jimmy? He's standing right here. But what you've been asking tonight aren't tough questions. They're insults disguised as interview tactics. There's a difference, and the fact that you don't know that difference tells me everything I need to know about you." Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his usual smirk replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. He tried to maintain his composure, but his voice betrayed his nervousness when he responded. "Look, Denzel, maybe I came on a little strong, but that's just my style. People expect a certain energy from this show." Denzel straightened up, his full height and presence now dominating the space. "Your style? Is that what you call it, when you invite someone onto your show and then spend the entire time trying to tear them down? Is that what you call it when you use your platform to spread negativity instead of celebrating the work that people do? Because where I come from, we call that something else entirely." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the usual late-night television sounds, the shuffling, the coughing, the whispered conversations, had stopped. Completely, everyone understood they were witnessing a masterclass in dignity under pressure. Watching a man defend not just himself, but the very concept of respect in an industry that had increasingly abandoned it. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that his usual tactics weren't working, tried a different approach. "You know what? You're right. Maybe I did push too hard. Can we just reset and finish the interview properly?" But Denzel wasn't interested in giving Jimmy Kimmel an easy way out. Reset? You think you can spend 15 minutes attacking my career, my relevance, my place in this industry, and then just reset when you realize you've gone too far? That's not how respect works, Jimmy. That's not how life works. The legendary actor began pacing slightly, his movement controlled but powerful. "You see, what you don't understand is that this isn't just about me. When you sit behind that desk and use your platform to tear people down, you're sending a message to everyone watching. You're telling young actors that it's okay to disrespect their elders. You're telling audiences that cruelty is entertainment. You're contributing to a culture where people think it's acceptable to attack someone's dignity for laughs." Kimmel tried to interrupt. "I really think you're overreacting to what was meant to be lighthearted banter." But Denzel held up a hand that stopped him immediately. Lighthearted banter? Denzel's voice rose slightly, the first time his volume had increased since the confrontation began. "You questioned my relevance, suggested I should quit, dismissed my 4 decades of work, and called me sensitive when I responded with dignity. If that's your idea of lighthearted banter, then you have a serious problem understanding basic human interaction." At this point, the show's producers were frantically signaling from the control room, clearly wanting to cut to commercial or end the segment entirely, but the cameras kept rolling. Everyone understood they were capturing something unprecedented. A moment when Hollywood's usual script of polite, publicity tours and softball questions had been completely thrown out the window. Denzel continued, his voice returning to that controlled intensity that made every word land with impact. "I've been in rooms with some of the most powerful people in this industry. Jimmy, I've worked with directors who could make or break careers, executives who control billion-dollar budgets, critics who can destroy a film with a single review. And, you know what? Even in the most challenging situations, even when there were real disagreements, there was always an underlying foundation of respect." He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "But what you've shown me tonight is that you don't understand respect. You think having a platform gives you the right to say whatever you want to whoever you want, regardless of the consequences. You think being on television makes you untouchable. Kimmel, now visibly sweating under the studio lights, tried once. More to regain control of the situation, I think maybe we should take a break and discuss this privately. Denzel shook his head. No, Jimmy, you chose to do this publicly, in front of your audience, on your show. You made this a public matter when you decided to attack me on camera. So we're going to finish this publicly. The actor looked directly into the main camera, addressing not just Kimmel, but the entire audience. People watching at home need to understand what they just witnessed. This wasn't an interview gone wrong. This was a deliberate attempt by a host to create controversy. At the expense of his guests' dignity, this was someone using their platform not to entertain or inform, but to tear down. He turned back to Kimmel, and that, Jimmy, is why I'm walking out of here. Not because I can't handle tough questions, not because I'm too sensitive, but because I refuse to participate in a culture that mistakes cruelty for entertainment. As Denzel began to walk toward the exit once again, Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation, calling out, "Denzel, wait, can't we work this out? This is all just a big misunderstanding." Denzel stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one last time. A misunderstanding. Jimmy, the only misunderstanding here is yours. You misunderstood who you were dealing with. You misunderstood what this platform should be used for. And most importantly, you misunderstood the difference between confidence and arrogance. At that moment, security personnel appeared at the edge of the stage, apparently having been called by the producers, who were trying to manage the unprecedented situation. But Denzel held up his hand to them. "I don't need an escort. I know how to walk out of a room with dignity," which is something that apparently can't be said for everyone here tonight. With that final statement, Denzel Washington walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a studio full of stunned silence, and a host who had learned too late that some lines should never be crossed. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing Jimmy Kimmel sitting alone at his desk, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity handle disrespect with such class and dignity? Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments. Do you think Denzel Washington was right to walk out, or should he have stayed and tried to work things out with Kimmel?